Have you ever felt yourself wondering, there are just so many options in this game, how could I ever decide what to do first? Link to the Past is such a fun game. Once you have a few items, you can go in just about any direction, especially when you're playing the randomized version of the game. So in this video, I'll guide you through the best routing tips for beginner randomized players. Don't worry, you don't need to be a beginner to benefit from these tips. This will help you whether it's your first seed or your 100th seed. Hi everyone, iKnit16 here to guide you through the land of Hyrule. I've played hundreds of Link to the Past seeds of various types, and I participate in a weekly league, and sometimes I dabble in speedrunning this game. You can watch me on Twitch on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. So what are these tips? The first one, and this is probably the most important one, is know your goal and prioritize accordingly. So when you're setting up your randomizer seed, you can set it to be like defeating Ganon, or maybe you just want to do a pedestal seed. These have very different requirements for beating it. If you only need pendants, you only need to beat 3 dungeons to win. So you should look for where those 3 dungeons are in your map. If you're doing a Triforce hunt, you don't necessarily need to beat that dungeon. You just want to get your treasures out of it and leave as soon as possible. I've actually lost a race before because I wanted to finish Tower of Hera when I could have just gone over to the other side of Death Mountain and picked up Paradox Cave, and that's where my last Triforce piece was. Which is really frustrating, but I didn't remember my goal. That's the first most important tip for any of your routing. Know where your crystal dungeons are if you need crystals. Know where your pendant dungeons are if you need pendants. Know where you need to go. Alright, so that kind of leads us into number 2. Prioritize those dense item checks. Know where the big money is. And by big money I mean know where all the big checks are. Blind's Hut in Kakariko Village has 5 items in it. So does Kakariko Well. 5 items there. That's a lot of stuff. There's Moldorm Cave, there's Paradox Cave. Know where these big things are all together. There's a lot of opportunity to have a few really important items in there, or it might just be junk. You don't know until you try it. That's the beauty of a rando. And what goes with that also is know what dungeons you can do kind of together. If you're doing the Palace of Darkness, Eastern is just a mirror away. And you can do both of those dungeons together. That's even better, because you don't have to run around the map to get everywhere. If you're doing a defeat Ganon seed and Turtle Rock is one of your crystals, if you can do that last, you can finish that and go straight to Ganon's tower, and you're already right there. You don't have to run up Death Mountain again. Things like this are very important in routing through to do things a little bit faster. But do big things together where you can. Try to put as many checks together at the same time. The next big advice for routing, know what you need for each of the various checks. For example, Desert Palace. You need either a book, or you can actually get in there with the flute, the Titan's mitts, and the mirror to get into the dungeon. Yeah, you can go through the Dark World to get there, did you know that? So once you have access to the dungeon, there's 6 treasures in there, but 4 of those checks are actually dungeon items, and there's 2 treasures. So you need to know that when you're planning your route to make sure that you don't go in there and realize, oh shoot, I don't actually have what I need. This is actually a big one with Swamp Palace. You're like, oh yeah, I just need my flippers, I need my hookshot, I got it, I'm in. You go through, and then you realize that after the first 2 checks, you need your hammer. And that's a lot of wasted time. When you could have gone somewhere else, hopefully, to find your hammer. Although, please do note, your hammer could be in that second check. Again, the fun of a randomizer. I have a really nice reference card for you guys. I have the link in the description, and that tells you what you need to do each dungeon, and also what is in each dungeon. And I hope it will be really useful for you. It's very useful for me. Knowing what you need for every check will really help you to know where you're going and how to plan where you're going next. So the next tip, don't leave orphan checks if you can. So that means don't leave something by itself unless you have to, or unless it's really easy to get back to. One example of something that's easy to get to is the sick kid in Kakariko Village. You need a bottle in order to get his item, but you're in Kakariko all the time, so it's not a huge deal to leave him by himself. But if you're doing the smith chain, for example, and you don't have the powder to do the bat, which is all right in that area, you go to the smith, but leaving him behind means you're gonna have to go back there and do it again. So trying to bundle up checks you can do together is very helpful for doing things faster. The next tip, count how many dungeon items you've gotten versus treasures. Some dungeons have very out of the way checks, like doing the left side of swamp. Sometimes it's very important to do that. Sometimes it's just got garbage in it. Other things like finishing off Misery Mire, getting the big chest in Ice Palace, or getting the basement of Tower of Hera, where you have to wait for all those tiles. These checks sometimes take a long time. And if you're counting how many treasures you've gotten versus how many dungeon items you've gotten, you might not even have to do those checks. But knowing that Tower of Hera only has 2 treasures in it, and you already got the 2 treasures, you don't need to go do that basement tile room, or get that big chest, or whatever. If you're done with items, then you're done. You don't have to go get those out of the way things. You don't have to kill every enemy. You don't have to get every single chest in the dungeon, necessarily. Sometimes, you know, the seed is obnoxious and your big treasure is there. So don't skip it if it's actually a treasure. But you can if it's just a small key, perhaps, and you already have all the small keys you need. And do keep in mind, some of these checks can have their own small key to get into it. Thieves Town is notorious for having the small key to get into the big chest room in the big chest. The next tip is try to avoid double or triple dipping into places that are hard to get to. So this goes along with not leaving orphan checks, knowing what you need to get through it. Some places are really terrible to go back into. Swamp Palace and Turtle Rock are probably the most difficult or obnoxious to get into, and they take a long time to get there. If you can go there while you have all the stuff, it's helpful. If you can wait to go in there until you have everything you need to fully clear it, that's also important. If you can. Sometimes seeds are gonna be, you know, peak A Link to the Past rando, and you're gonna have to double into something. I've had to triple check into pod before, but if you can, do it all at once. The next tip is know your limits. This isn't necessarily a routing thing, but just to avoid frustration in your first few, or even your 100th dungeon, know what you are capable of doing. You probably don't need to beat blind with a hammer and 5 hearts. You probably can go find something that makes blind a little bit easier to do, like a Cane of Samaria or a Cane of Birna, or just more hearts. Something to make it more survivable for you. I just found out in a recent seed, I'm not very good at doing Vitreous with just a hammer. I had to go back when I had a bow to beat him. I died, and then that means I had to spend another, 3-4 minutes getting all the way back through the dungeon to try again, fail again. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go find other stuff, and then I'll come back, and then I'll beat him and get my dungeon item. Because most likely there are other things you can get to help you out. You don't need to just come across the first challenge you get to and really beat into it most of the time. There are a few times, especially in Inverted, where, yeah, 3-heart hammer blind is totally a thing. You might have to beat him, but most of the time you can go find other stuff to help you out. Those are my best beginner's tips for routing through A Link to the Past Randomized. Hopefully all of these together will really help you out. Do any of these resonate with you guys? What is your favorite? Or did I miss something you think is really important? Please let me know in the comment section. While you're at it, I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, and you can find me on Twitch on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you can catch my future videos where I'm going to dive deep into each dungeon, deep into this rando, and give you guys more tips to improve your game. And I hope you guys have fun routing through your randomizer. Alright, bye!